I am so excited to welcome everyone. Welcome Dr. Katie Holick to the stage. Um, Katie has been a colleague and friend of mine for the last, well, just over a year, but we've gotten a lot accomplished in a short amount of time. And I'm really proud and just really happy with getting to know her and the rest of the XR at University of Montana community of practice. So I'm going to mute uh, my microphone and turn it over to you, Katie. Thanks. It's so good to see you.
Yes, Jonathan, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak to the iLRN community. I know it's a large, vast international community, and so again, as they were saying earlier, I really appreciate your time today. So today, what I would love to discuss with you is kind of the steps and how we really started to dig in to build an iLRN chapter here at Montana. And so what you can see here on my initial slide is kind of a little bit about our campus. And again, my name's Dr. Katie Holick, and I am a faculty member in the Department of Biomedical and Pharmaceutical Sciences. I do work in the XR field. I'm specifically interested in healthcare empathy and training modules for that, as well as the use of VR in university level pedagogy. And so just to kind of keep us on track today I'm going to cover a little bit of kind of a who, what, why, and where of the Montana chapter of iLRN. We'll talk about creating an XR community for the state of Montana, why XR is kind of a natural fit for the state of Montana, and what we hope to do with that iLRN community. And again, I think I've said Montana several times. So first off, I realize that I am speaking to an international community, and because of that, Montana might elicit different images in your mind, different understandings of what that means. And so I just wanted to kind of start by giving a brief introduction as to like the state of Montana and kind of how XR fits within that space. And so Montana is the state that's highlighted here in the United States. We're on the northwestern side of the United States. We butt right up against Canada. But probably some of the things that are most interesting about our state is that we are the fourth largest state. It's one of those states that you can just start driving and still be in the state 8 or 9 hours later. And but it does have a diverse set of landscapes. We house both the Rocky Mountains and kind of the Great Plains on the east. Now, in terms of other components of Montana that are relevant outside of kind of that expansive distance, is that we do have a rich culture in agricultural, natural sciences, and tourism. But we also have a very thriving tribal nations that are part of the state of Montana as well. So we have 10 tribal nations that are are represented here in the state of Montana currently, and seven different federally recognized tribal lands. And so the reason I mention that is some of the specific work that we have done in the XR space has been directly in collaboration with one of these tribal nations, or with some of the tribal nations, really trying to capture and highlight kind of the cultural nuance and the beautiful expansiveness of those respective cultures. And so I think, again, you're probably like, why am I learning about Montana? I think it's important to understand who we are and why we're using XR in all of the unique ways that we are. So that's kind of the where. The next question is kind of why. As I talked about kind of the expansiveness of the state of Montana in terms of its vastness, we do have a lot of rural individuals who live in the state. So using tools like XR can be so helpful for engaging people who are, again, 8 or 9 hours away. You can physically meet, not well physically, but you can virtually meet in the same space and have a conversation like you're standing in the same room, which again, if you have somebody in a tribal nation in Fort Peck that's 10 hours away from, Missoula, where we're based, it's a huge advantage for purposes like that. We also, again, as I mentioned previously, a couple of the different projects are focused on cultural storytelling and preserving of Indigenous knowledge, language, and community stories. And then lastly, we have a lot of workforce development initiatives that we've been working on in relationship to the application of XR. And so when we talk about our iLRN chapter, we're starting at the University of Montana, but we're hoping to expand it to other universities, community partners, science museums. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more moving forward, but just kind of driving innovation from a university kind of gives us a physical place to kind of start that work, but it's definitely expanding outside of that space. So our who here is kind of our Montana chapter of iLRN. And so we were lucky enough to meet Jonathan pretty early on in the conceptualization of creating an XR community at the University of Montana. And with Jonathan's knowledge and expansive relationships in the international community and his relationship to iLRN, he very quickly said, hey, I know that you all are interested in getting this going at the University of Montana, but you really should think bigger. Think bigger about how to engage with an international community, how to become a part of that story, and how to create capacity to interact in a lot more thoughtful ways. And so our Montana chapter of iLRN, first iteration of it, I would say, is through the University of Montana Community of Practice model, in which we have, students, faculty, staff, IT members. It's a pretty diverse group that we have that comprise our community of practice. And I actually think we have strengths in that diversity because everybody comes with their own, obviously, history and background, but it allows us to understand, again, a little bit more nuance as to what is necessary for us to be able to support XR in this state. And so we're working on extending these to other collaborators within the state. So as I said before, when we started our community of practice, it was all encompassing of XR. So XR, VR, and AR made sure that kind of everyone interested in those fields would have a space to meet. And so we started last spring meeting monthly and really trying to lay down the foundation and really assess the needs of what our group needed, specifically here at the U, but as you'll see later, some of the things that we identified at the university also expand to kind of the Montana group as well. And so we identified, again, our faculty, staff, and students that were using this for a variety of different purposes, not just for teaching, but also for learning. Some individuals are using for research, and some individuals are using it for community engagement. And we even have a few students who are, again, doing this for career development purposes. We were supported internally at our institution. We were lucky enough to get support from our University of Montana Office of Organizational Learning and Development, as well as our Provost Office for Educational Initiatives and Innovation. So having those infrastructure support, I think, was really important to kind of, I think, cementing our place on campus and making sure that once we decided to grow, we would have people within the infrastructure that can really kind of be like, okay, if you are going to grow, let's talk about how and when and what that's going to look like, which has been phenomenal. So again, we're working on co-collaboration and generation of immersive tools, experiences, and again, hopefully helping other folks identify how to build this community within higher ed. So I'm going to pause. I feel like in class, I tend to get what I like to call a little auctioneering here. So I want to pause and see if anyone has any questions or comments so far as to what I'm presenting. I just want to make sure that if you do have a question, you get an opportunity to ask that in the midway through the talk, not like at the very end, but okay, well, I'm going to keep going. So again, the purpose of our community of practice was to foster collaboration, develop XR expertise, and build interdisciplinary partnerships across campus. Now, again, the advantage to starting with a community practice is it gave us almost like a sandbox to figure out how we want to interact with each other, how we want to support one another, and then taking that structure and kind of expanding it more extensively to our iLRN chapter of Montana. And so with the XR community of practice and the Montana iLRN chapter, kind of the initial pre-work that was done was to create a technological place where we could share information. We haven't established anything through iLRN quite yet, but using things at our university, things like our SharePoint hub has been really helpful for dispersing information and kind of co-collaborating and document generation. it was important for us, again, to identify the stakeholders both here on campus and those within the state of Montana at large. And a little later on, I'll actually show you some of the other stakeholders that we have identified, and then starting to schedule events so we can start to really just create a community related to the topics that individuals who are related or interested in XR are able to attend and hopefully get some information regarding. So when we did eventually meet for community of practice, we did icebreakers to build community, which I think again is pretty important. We started to brainstorm. We tried to identify our needs, and it's almost kind of like community-based participatory research and a needs assessment, right? When you're building a community, you really need to, and collaborating with a community, you need to be in tune with what that community needs. Now, obviously, the purpose of this talk is for me to kind of express to you what worked for us at the University of Montana, but I think this is an important step that every chapter should go through, is having those conversations with your stakeholders and identifying what the needs are for your specific chapter, right? Some chapters might have a ton of infrastructure support, right? Some might have a ton of hardware. Some might have a ton of developers represented in their chapter. And so because of those different compositions and components, it's probably going to determine what your chapter is really strong in and what other things it might additionally need. In the order of transparency, we made sure that everybody had a good understanding of what projects everyone else within our chapter were completing. And so the way that we did it was we just literally created a slideshow and we said, okay, everybody create a single slide regarding your work. And then at the next meeting, we had everyone present kind of their one slide, which was great. It gave us an opportunity to have both a live interaction, have the ability to hear that person's expression of their work. And then if you were like, oh, who does that thing? Like, who does drone capture? You could go back and say, oh, it's Bert. That's his slide that I need to kind of communicate with regarding if you wanted to, like, let's say, use drone capture in your project. So that's, again, a step I think that's really important, is creating that transparency for your group that allows them to collaborate more effectively or help one another out. We have, as I'll talk about later, some of our more structured events. We have had innovation workshops and some XR demos. And so those were things that we also built in to some of our community of practice and chapter activities. So if we wanted to get, again, after getting all of the activities reported in that kind of PowerPoint document, it allowed us as leadership related to this community of practice is start to really understand really what the landscape looked like for XR, let's say at the University of Montana. Like, who were our users, who were our developers, who was related to infrastructure, and kind of breaking folks out into these three categories. And so again, with transparency, it makes it so much easier to identify whose strengths lie in which areas and which areas might be possible points of collaboration. And so this is a table that was actually included in a submission that we made to iLRN and presented last summer, which I'll talk about a little bit later at the iLRN Chicago. And so this is something everyone who's in the iLRN community has access to. But again, I think putting things into this type of structure really helps you understand who's doing what and if and how you can work together on said projects. So outcomes for our iLRN chapter in Montana. Again, really our focus in this space is always going to be community building and creating a space, place, or cloud to share ideas and resources. In our particular instance, we used a SharePoint, which is, again, just one tech approach to that. And I'll talk about Discord here a little later on. For us, it was finding a way to share information, doing an inventory of all of our hardware to see who had what, to make sure we weren't maybe repurchasing hardware that somebody else had and was just kind of sitting there that maybe somebody else could utilize. So really trying to pool our resources in that respect. We just, again, tried to share expertise and create collaborations. We've also started to share funding sources and identifying those funding sources. So as we move forward and we're trying to share and apply for grants to continue to support either individual work or collective work being done across the university, that's been really advantageous to identify where some sources of funding might be pulled from. I'll talk a little bit later about a planned public showcase we have. And again, just doing the needs assessment and understanding like, what do we need to do to grow? Where are our sticking points going to be? And making that a really open conversation amongst your chapter as you start to scale it to maybe a larger group. So in this case, we started small at the University of Montana, and now we're starting to expand across the state. So how is that going to change some of the practices that we have versus our community practice and our iLRN chapter? So when we did an assessment of our other XR community partners across the state of Montana, we can obviously see here at the top, we have the University of Montana and the community of practice that I quickly mentioned. We do have our ongoing Immersive Learning Network chapter. And again, this is designed to have a diverse group that composes and working towards moving XR forward on the campus here at UM. At Montana State, which is the other major university in the state of Montana, there are additional virtual reality labs there. There is also at Montana State, they have a Project PAVE, which is a VR experiences for youth ages 14 to 21. And again, it's helping them gain some clinical skills and some understandings of future career possibilities. I'll note here, previously I talked a little bit about how important our Indigenous population and have been in terms of collaboration for certain XR projects here in Montana. So for example, the Blackfeet Eco Knowledge is an Indigenous-led initiative that is interested in creating a immersive VR platform for Blackfeet language, culture, and ecological knowledge. And then we also have a couple high school levels and higher ed level kind of interdisciplinary approaches to integrating virtual reality for students to understand different career paths. So this is just, again, the first step of us identifying collaborators, individuals we want to kind of bring into our immersive learning network that we're hoping that, again, across the state of Montana, we can get a really diverse group of statewide practitioners and users that are going to be able to kind of help move XR forward collectively. So for building an iLRN chapter, again, we really did look to iLRN to kind of help us develop the toolkit for, again, as we expand this out, like what are some tools that are going to be necessary for us to take kind of this very local, yes, at the University of Montana group and kind of expand it to this statewide almost initiative. So for the chapter framework, and I think Jonathan might have mentioned this in the previous hour a little bit, but again, we're kind of right now between the stage 1 and stage 2 chapter framework areas, right between formation and community building. So we've established our local chapter. We have generally identified our leadership team. We've started to identify our stakeholders. We haven't gone as far as to develop a mission and communication plan, but we do have, again, kind of our chapter charter and founding team established. And so now that we have begun to identify other stakeholders within the state, we're in the process of starting to build engagement and awareness. And so as I'll speak about here in a few slides, we do have a larger community event that is going to be called XR Day at UM, in which we'll be inviting some of our additional stakeholders across the state to come and chat with us about what we can do together as a group to really, again, uplift the state of XR across the state. Again, community building is obviously going to look like building engagement and awareness, hosting those sessions, networking events, XR demos, which again, we're hoping this XR Day really is able to encapsulate. As I spoke about previously, for us as a community practice, it was important to create transparency and a way to share materials. And so now we just need to kind of scale that up so folks who maybe are outside the university system still have a way to access said materials. We're hoping once this community building happens, kind of just naturally, we will also have stage 3 and 4 fall into place, where we have individuals who maybe didn't know one another existed within the XR space within the state are now able to collaborate on both projects and scholarly outputs. I will say, for me personally, iLRN in Chicago was kind of a game changer for me. I went and presented in my same session. I was able to identify a production company that was also based out of Montana. And so we are in current talks about that. And so I think that just speaks to the point that I was in Chicago meeting somebody from Montana. It kind of really establishes the need for, again, these local chapters so we can really lean on each other's, especially for sharing geographical spaces. And so, like I said, that kind of led us naturally to step 3, which was collaboration and research. And then 4, kind of reporting and sustainability, and really kind of coming up with a plan and even a succession plan for leadership to make sure whatever we're creating now to push XR in Montana forward, that we have long-term plans to make sure that that initial driving force, that initial enthusiasm becomes sustained across time. So in terms of some activities and deliverables that are kind of suggested, we have kind of things like XR playdates, innovation workshops, and some of those we've done here on UM's campus through, again, kind of our XR COP model. We had a XR playdate last spring, and I think it might have been one of our most successful meetings because everybody brought their toys, for lack of a better term, and got to play and see, again, the strengths and maybe some of the limitations of some of the different software and hardware that people were working on here on campus. We've had a couple education roundtables. For example, I think it was really helpful for those individuals who want to do educational research related to XR. We had one of our IRB support people come in and actually talk about how to write an effective IRB to be able to conduct that research, which I think was a really nice compliment. Outreach and engagement, again, partnering with schools, libraries, and museums. We do have a children's science museum here in Missoula, as well as in our state capital in Helena. And I know both of those hubs were not on the previous table, but I do know they're also interested in using immersive projections or headsets in the science museum space. And so that's another opportunity for us to kind of, again, elevate and really reach out to the community and show them what XR can do in terms of just kind of changing your mind about how we see the world around us. Creation of research and scholarship, again, co-authoring abstracts. We've been able to do that by submitting to iLRN conferences and iLead, again, which I'll report out on some subsequent slides. And I think a really big game changer for our community of practice was when we started to see more students attend, starting to see more students from our campus interacting from both the user standpoint as well as from the developer standpoint. And so again, I think that diversity and composition is so important for the richness of conversations that you'll have within your iLRN chapters. And then we're hoping by creating this chapter, being affiliated with iLRN, we're literally looking towards creating global collaborations. So again, using that Discord that everyone was introduced to, and being active there, I think will be a really helpful part for us to identify other collaborators internationally who are working on similar projects that we're doing here in Montana. So what have we been doing in Montana? Well, I posted on the XR COP Discord here a little bit. I did that this morning. And so we have dipped our toes into the water of the Discord, hopefully utilizing that again to identify not only collaborators, but also identifying tech trends abroad. Obviously, everyone who works in this field recognizes how rapidly it is consistently evolving. And so I think it's important for us to also kind of stay up to speed to make sure that the work that we're doing is continuing to be relevant in the current state of XR as it exists. We also have begun to work on developing a Instagram. Last year, when we were having our meetings, we met a few times in Frame VR, which if you haven't used Frame VR, I highly suggest just dipping your toe in the water. It can really change how you think about collaborating in an online space, as well as maybe even teaching in an asynchronous course, or depending on, again, what your particular utility for XR is. But we used it as an XR playdate and even did a meeting there while we were hosting Dr. Funman Fung from the University of Dublin. So last year, outside of, again, kind of getting all of these iLRN toolkits, social media applications kind of implemented, we also did have a few Zoom webinars where our iLRN, kind of the infancy of our iLRN chapter, also presented the Montana Futures Forum. Even today's event kind of falls into that as well. And again, we had Dr. Fung visit us here at the University of Montana. He was here live. He presented and collaborated with our community of practice, but then he also had a talk that he gave to our community at our University of Montana community at large. And so I think that ability to collaborate internationally was facilitated by Jonathan. But I think having Funman come to the university accomplished was that it really opened our eyes as to, like, we're not this island in Montana who's doing this XR work. There's really a whole international community that's also doing it, and that we need to do maybe a better job about reaching out. And so that's, again, one of the reasons it's been so lovely to work alongside Jonathan, is he has this he just understands the pulse of the XR community in a larger scale than I think many of us are thinking of here. So, some of the objectives for us as our chapter is to continue to contribute to the iLRN community online. We did submit an abstract and presented at iLRN Chicago last summer, and as I said, came out being a wonderful professional opportunity for myself. We're going to be working on submitting an iLead abstract for the Greece conference as well, and then we're hopefully going to work on creating kind of a section of the global report on what's going on across the state of Montana within our Montana iLRN chapter. So that will be kind of a compilation of the table that I showed you about what's happening at UM, and additionally to the stakeholders and hopefully future collaborators that we've identified kind of across the state of Montana. I shouldn't say abroad, but yes, across the state. So what we're hoping is that the iLRN chapter can help us really, again, address things like sustainability and growth. So doing things like securing both institutional grant funding for continued operations, making sure that as we continue to grow as a community, that we're getting the institutional support, and we're also ourselves even building the infrastructure that we have capacity to build to facilitate the conversations and collaborations that people might want to generate. We want to also, in addition to that, make sure we're doing a lot of development of both mentorship pipelines for both students and maybe even early career researchers related to the XR space. I'll talk about it in a few slides, but getting the onboarding process, as many of you who are in the XR community know, it's one of those things that once you get exposed to it and you understand all of the possibilities that are available, you really want to kind of share that with the world, literally. And so identifying ways to share that with people and get them up to speed and give them the tools to effectively integrate it into their research, their classroom, whatever they want to do effectively is it's its own kind of challenge. Um, and we also hope to host a kind of a state or regional XR symposia. This might not be necessarily something that happens, let's say in the next few months, but I think this concept of getting everybody kind of gathered together to have those very open conversations. And then maybe as we start as our chapter here in Montana, expand it out to the Northwest, further to the Rocky Mountain regions, to the North American area. Again, there's really no limitation as to the collaborations that we could form moving forward. So I do have a few final thoughts related to this. And so again, with the creation of a chapter, our intention is really to encourage interdisciplinary innovation. So how can we take the individuals who are kind of in a very same regional area who might have similar needs or applications in mind that are working maybe with a similar population, how can we apply XR in those spaces? Building faculty capacity is part of this too, or building any user capacity, making sure that we're supporting people in the tools that they need to really not just survive, but really thrive in the XR space. Part of that is to start to possibly create a pipeline for ethical and inclusive design, which is going to be something that is probably going to be led hopefully here at the university, where we have an opportunity to do co-design with developers and users. So that's something that we're kind of keeping an eye on for the future. And again, because we are a university-based system, thinking about its application both in the classroom as well as in research settings. So how can we really contribute to both immersive learning, research and evaluation, and having that impact maybe the user and learning experience across the landscape of the state of Montana. Now, challenges, it's probably like, this is close to one of my last slides. So talking about challenges probably isn't the best way to stop, but I think it's important to stay very realistic as to like, what is achievable, what are our stumbling blocks, and what are we acknowledging up front? Obviously, funding is always going to be a concern for most individuals. And so I think the way that we kind of meet that challenge is by creating these opportunities to share resources for RFAs for grants, maybe even supporting each other through the grant writing process. And additionally, I think the collaborations just strengthen any proposal that any one person is developing in that space. For uniform onboarding training. So I think this is actually someplace where our community of practice could make a huge could make a huge impact by developing an onboarding training, based out of the University of Montana that we open up to kind of, again, statewide users and practitioners. That's basically says to them, like, you're interested in getting into XR. Here's kind of an asynchronous online training that you can do at your own speed that will kind of walk you through the steps of like identifying the appropriate software that for whatever you're trying to achieve, identifying the appropriate hardware probably would be first and then software, and then if there's no existing software out there that achieves your intended outcomes, are there any collaborators available that could help you start to develop your own software that does achieve the outcomes that you want? And so developing kind of that onboarding training, I think, could be really helpful, and in an unintentional way also start to create a larger community base, right? For every person that now understands and can utilize XR, in whatever they're trying to accomplish, that's just going to create that richer community and conversation, which kind of leads to the next point of interdisciplinary collaboration. Now, another challenge that the XR space, I think, consistently probably hears is the relationship to the accessibility. And so continuing to have that conversation with our stakeholders, I think, is so important as to like, okay, if we are trying to make this an accessible experience for everyone, are there avenues for us to present this in an immersive way, maybe in a non-immersive way with the same content that allows for accessibility for every individual who would like to go into that experience. And then a few slides ago, we did talk about kind of long-term sustainability and engagement. And so there is some planning, long-term planning for that. As we go through this, again, having very clear goals are important, broad support, making sure that everyone has a voice at the table and that you're meeting people where they're at, right? Everybody's journey within this space can be varied. You know, you have individuals who picked up, you know, some maybe they did AR yesterday for the first time, or maybe they've developed their own AR app and it's out there and it's marketed. So I think just again, making sure that you're making it accessible for everybody at every level of the XR space, especially in a diverse in kind of a diverse setting is quite important. So those are some of the challenges that I just kind of wanted to like state out front. These are things that we know are going to be issues, but hopefully we're able to overcome them by being thoughtful and acknowledging them up front. Okay, so I know I'm a little ahead of I know I was slated here for an hour. Hopefully there will be a ton of discussion here at the end. But I just wanted to thank everyone for spending some time today to kind of hang out and listen to the seminar, a little bit about the iLRN chapter here in Montana. I just want to thank the iLRN community. I want to thank Jonathan Richter for inviting me and allowing me this space, as well as the University of Montana for the community practice and all of the individuals that are collaborators here on our campus. And so I guess I've opened myself up for plenty of time for questions or discussion. Again, I think that an iLRN chapter is a great way to build local community. I think it's a great opportunity to interact with an international community. And I think so often with like, especially the XR world, since we are such a rapidly moving and changing place, it's nice to have some consistency in the individuals that you know and collaborate with and kind of lean on them in those moments of challenge as we're trying to also, you know, continue to evolve in that space as practitioners. So yeah, thank you all for your time, and hopefully there will be some questions. If you have questions, feel free to share them in the chat. And Jonathan, if there's any like discussion you'd like to have regarding the iLRN chapter here at in Montana, I'm happy to do that too. Oh, you're not, you
I
have,
said, wow, yeah, thank you so much, Katie. I was muted there.
yeah.
Fantastic presentation. Really represents, you know, the great work that you and the rest of the University of Montana community have done to build capacity, and also representing sort of how a chapter can really amplify that capacity by connecting to the international network.
Mhm.
And like you say, I mean, we're really interested in having chapters from around the world, from Greece, where we're going to be visiting for our conference in June, in New York, where Maya and her colleagues are, in Colombia, in Kenya, Nigeria, in across Europe, across the world. Honestly, there's so many different unique circumstances according to different geographies, different cultures, different ways of doing things, different challenges that people are facing. And also the trends are slightly different in each of these places. So we would really love to kind of, in a reciprocal way, invite you to create your chapter, um, learn from some of the chapters who are getting out in front, like Katie and like Jorge in the Columbia chapter, like Daphne Economou and Tassos Mikropoulos are doing in Europe, um, and and uh, and learn from others and join us as we can kind of co-create, collaborate, and support one another as the XR kind of takes off around the world, because we see that this is happening, and it's very complex. There's so much to cook. There's so much to figure out and correlate. And we
Mhm.
really feel like this worldwide effort that iLRN kind of is hoping to ensconce, and then these individual chapters within it and the regional hubs by continent can act as a sensitive, reciprocal sort of framework um, for us all. So I really, really appreciate, Katie, that you came and highlighted so much of the aspects of, I think, what a chapter can do for iLRN.